Today we're in Central Florida, in Polk County, as we navigate our way through Lakeland, a charming city known for its lakes, architecture, and swans. Lakeland is located between Tampa and Orlando and has almost 113,000 residents within its 67 square miles. Today, we'll be hitting a lot of Lakeland's historic locations downtown, including a strip mall, a lake, a house, a college, a theater, and a tax collector's office. Trust me, it's more exciting than it sounds. Now let's talk about Lakeland's timeline. The very first residents of Lakeland were the Tocobaga, Timucua, and Calusa Indian tribes who settled on the Florida peninsula at the end of the last ice age. That's a long time ago. A few hundred years later, the descendants of those tribes settled with the Creek Indians and became part of the Indian Seminole tribe. In 1845, Florida became a state, and in 1861, Polk County was officially established. By the 1870s, European American settlers arrived from Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, and South Carolina. But it wasn't until 1882 when Abraham Munn from Kentucky bought 80 acres of what is now downtown Lakeland. As the railroad expanded into Central Florida, more and more visitors came down. Okay, our first stop is at the Southgate Shopping Center with its memorable and iconic arch. I mean, how awesome is that? This arch was designed by Donovan Dean, who moved to the city in 1938 and was chosen by George Jenkins, the owner of the Publix grocery stores, to design the shopping center. The arch is huge. It's 70 feet tall, made of steel, and weighs, get this, it weighs 67 tons. Yeah, that's a lot. A few years ago, the neon lights, which were broken, was replaced by LEDs, so it should mean that this arch will shine brightly for generations to come. This arch is so iconic that it can be seen in Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands, and more recently, in the Disney family film, The One and Only Ivan. Okay, here we are on Beacon Road, heading toward Lake Hollingsworth. All right, now let's get back to Lakeland's history. In 1883, Florida Southern College was founded, and we'll go more into that later. 2 years later, Lakeland, named because of its many lakes, was incorporated on January 1st, 1885, where citrus, cattle, and phosphate mining supported the growing community. Lake Hollingsworth is one of the 38 named lakes in Lakeland. Lake Hollingsworth was named after John Henry Hollingsworth, who was one of the early pioneers that settled there. This particular lake is 350 acres in size. That is a large body of water. Riding on the shores of these lakes is one of the real joys of riding your Navi in Lakeland. They each have their own neighborhoods around them, their own size, their own variations in wildlife. Today it was really peaceful just riding around this lake. It's massive, it's beautiful. And across the way is Florida Southern College. What a great view. Here we are passing by Florida Southern College. I think this college has been to more locations than I've ridden my Navi. It started out in Orlando in 1833 as a Methodist seminary called the Southern Florida Institute. In 1885, it relocated to Leesburg and changed its name to Florida Conference College. In 1901, it moved to Palm Harbor, which back then was called Sutherland. And a year later, it changed its name to Florida Seminary. And 4 years after that, it changed its name to Southern College. Because of a fire, it had to move to Clearwater in 1921, and then a year later, it had another fire. So luckily, they were able to purchase 67 acres of an old citrus grove in Lakeland, but it wasn't until 1935 that the school got its final name, Florida Southern College. Fortunately, it survived low enrollment through the Great Depression, and the school president at that time was a guy named Dr. Lud Spivey. Lud. Is that short for something? I don't know. Anyway, he came up with this really cool idea. In 1938, he wrote architect Frank Lloyd Wright and asked him to design the school as a quote-unquote temple of education. So on May 8th, 1938, at nearly 71 years old, Wright walked the gently rolling grounds of the college, which overlook Lake Hollingsworth. Now, apart from the college's 7 existing structures, the majority of the campus was undeveloped and covered in citrus trees. Wright said that he could envision buildings on this landscape that would grow, quote, out of the ground and into the light, a child of the sun, end quote. And over the next 20 years, Florida Southern College built 13 of Wright's proposed 18 buildings. My daughter actually went to college here, and I've walked this campus. It's really unique and it's beautiful. Now, my daughter, she volunteered as one of those students that gives tours to potential students and their parents. And she told me, she said, Frank Lloyd Wright wanted nature and the buildings to kind of come together in a way that if you were inside a building, you'd feel like you were on the outside. And when you were outside, the landscape would connect you back to his structures. And they do just that. If you're in town and you get a chance, take a school tour for yourself. It's really neat. And on the right here is one of Wright's home designs. In 1939, Dr. Spivey had commissioned Wright for a single-family house to be used as faculty housing. Now, Wright delivered a beautiful residential design, a concept for affordable housing for the typical American family at the time. Unfortunately, the building wasn't funded and completed until 2013. But it was a great way to honor the architect that helped bring their Lakeland campus to life. I've also been inside that building. Really neat, also really small. I just think people are also shorter back then, honestly. But check it out if you can. All right, now let's get back to Lakeland's history. For a short time, Lakeland had a rival town on the south side of Lake Parker, which is the largest lake in the city. That town was called Acton. It had a church before Lakeland did, and more importantly, a railroad depot. But under mysterious circumstances, the depot burned. And shortly thereafter, a larger, modern structure was built in Lakeland. Acton, after that, began to decline and was gone by 1906. In 1885, the Tremont Hotel, said to have been the best hotel in Central Florida at the time, was built by Munn. What's funny is that the early city fathers knew how to deal with crime. In 1886, they passed an ordinance prohibiting straggling around the town. The mayor's report for the second quarter of that year showed 36 arrests. Offenses included fighting, gambling, boisterous cursing and swearing, which I guess if you do it quietly, it's not a crime. Public drinking, lewd conduct, discharging firearms, sanitary violations, which is a bit of concern, petty larceny, and peddling without a license. And the first jail was called the McDermott House, named after its first occupant. Wow, there's a legacy for you. In 1898, over 9,000 troops were stationed in downtown Lakeland on the shores of Lake Morton. and the 10th Cavalry Regiment, one of the original Buffalo Soldier regiments, were housed on the banks of Lake Wire. They were waiting to go to Cuba during the Spanish-American War. The Florida land boom of the 1920s resulted in the construction of a lot of important buildings, a number of which are listed today on the National Register of Historic Places, like the Terrace Hotel, the New Florida Hotel, which is now the Lake Mirror Tower Apartments, the Polk Theater, and the Lakeland Chamber of Commerce. The Cleveland Indians held spring training in Lakeland from 1923 to 1927 at the Henley Field Ballpark. If you live in Florida or the Southeast now, it's expanded, you know Publix, and it actually began in Lakeland in the 1930s. The founder of Publix, George Jenkins, rapidly expanded the supermarket chain, and he installed the headquarters of Publix in Lakeland. Now, this yellow home on the left was built in 1901 and is a classic Craftsman Bungalow. It's one of Lakeland's cherished century homes, which celebrates the significance of the city's first residential neighborhoods developed over 100 years ago. Can you hear it? Can you hear the algorithms whining for food? That's right, it's time to feed the algorithms. So please hit the buttons, the likes, the subscribes or comments or whatever the algorithm needs to be happy so that it tells more people like you to share these videos with other people that would enjoy the ride. Now coming up here on the right is Lake Mirror Tower. It was built in 1926, is 8 stories high and over 90,000 square feet. And across the street, you can see from it the stunning Francis Langford Promenade on the edge of the lake, which was built in 1946. But back to the hotel. It was originally called the Florida Hotel, but upon finding that name was already taken, they came up with a brilliant idea to call it the New Florida Hotel. Catchy, huh? It opened in 1926 and hosted the Detroit Tigers during spring training, plus also had visitors like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and Frank Lloyd Wright. It closed in 1996 but was purchased by the city and reopened in 2004 as an apartment complex, offering 78 apartments overlooking Lake Mirror, which inspired its current name. So on our left here is the Polk Theater. It's a classic 1,400-seat venue built in 1928 by John E. Melton. It was to host vaudeville shows and show movies. And it was originally known as the Melton Theater, no surprise there, but it was eventually named in honor of the 11th President of the United States, James Polk. The architect, J.E. Casal, recreated a Mediterranean village experience inside the theater, and it looked like you were looking at a full-scale Renaissance townhouse setting. Above, when you're in the seats, was a starry ceiling painted in a deep royal blue with twinkling stars and a sunrise-sunset effect. And this design approach is much like the beautiful Tampa Theater in downtown Tampa. But that's for another ride. Let's get back to the Polk Theater. It opened on December 22nd, 1928, and the first film shown was a Warner Brothers all-talkie special called On Trial. Never heard of it. Over the years, the theater hosted films and live events with performers such as Tom Mix, Gene Autry, Glenn Miller, and even Elvis Presley in 1956. Over the decades, the theater survived hurricanes, fires, and even near demolition in the 1970s. But fortunately, in 1982, it was resurrected by a group of Lakeland residents who came together to save the old theater. They raised money, and major restoration of the building was completed in 1999. Today, the Polk Theater does what it's always done: show movies, live shows, orchestras, plays, and ballets. Lakeland is one of the larger medium-sized cities located in Florida. It's got a population of about 120,000 and 65 neighborhoods, and is the 22nd largest community in Florida with a size of 75 square miles. As far as education goes, 90% of the residents are high school graduates, 8% are attending college, and 27% are college graduates. The per capita income is just over $33,000, $8,000 below the national average, and the median household income is nearly $59,000, which is $18,000 less than the national average, and 14% of the residents live below poverty level. As far as demographics go, 58% of the population is white, 19% are black, 18% are Hispanic, and 2% are Asian. There are about 44,000 residences in Lakeland, and the median home value is about $265,000. Average rent is nearly $1,900 a month. Okay, I personally have never thought a tax collector building would be this cool. I mean, look at this thing. This amazing Art Deco tax collector building was built in 1953 as a Publix grocery store. When the store opened, it was described in the local media as the masterpiece market of the 1950s. It has a signature facade of glass blocks and neon lights, and this building became a landmark for the neighborhood. But even landmarks can hit hard times, and the store closed in 1964 when Publix opened a new store at a new shopping center. Now, it survived over the years as a number of different businesses and was eventually renovated in 2013 to become the Polk County Tax Collector's Office. And since the government never goes out of business, I'm pretty sure this building will be around a long time, which is great because it's gorgeous. If you thought Lake Hollingsworth was big, well, welcome to Lake Parker. On our right-hand side, this massive lake is the largest in Lakeland at just over 2,100 acres in size. What's interesting is that this lake is used a lot for fishing and boating. There's parks up the road, there are boat ramps, recreational areas. It's really popular. And this is what you see when you drive toward the Detroit Tigers spring training facility, which we'll get to in a minute. What's interesting about Lake Parker is that for its breadth, it's really not very deep. It's only about 5 feet deep. And, for me, when I was thinking about lakes, I think that they're standalone entities, usually springs or sinkholes that were filled naturally with water. I never think of them as actually connected to other bodies of water. But this one actually is. It has inflow water from Lake Mirror and Lake Bonnie, and it outflows to Saddle Creek and Peace River. You learn something new every day. Now, this lake was named after another pioneer settler named Streety Parker. Streety. Man, they had the best names in the old days. So this is the Tiger Baseball Complex on our left-hand side, full of a lot of practice baseball fields for spring training and single-A baseball. But the main field where the Detroit Tigers actually play their spring baseball is this field, Publix Field at Joker Marchant Stadium. Now, the Tigers actually began spring training in Lakeland in 1934, and they've been using this location since 1966. And what's neat is that the Tigers' relationship with Lakeland is the longest between a Major League Baseball team and a spring training host city. It was named after local resident and former Lakeland Parks and Recreation Director Marcus Joker Marchant. I don't know why he's called Joker, but there we go. Okay, so one of the things you'll see as you're riding your Navi around Lakeland, especially because there's just so many lakes, is that you'll see a lot of swans there. And that has its own interesting story that is unique to Lakeland. On February 4th, 1957, two swans gifted by Queen Elizabeth II arrived on Lake Morton in downtown Lakeland. By 1926, Lakeland had a swan population of about 20. And by 1954, the last swan had died, had passed away. So a former Lakeland resident who had been living in England decided to take this up with Queen Elizabeth II. I mean, who wouldn't? You see, one of the Queen's lesser-known titles is Seigneur of Swans as the Queen, and the royal family are inherent owners of all British swans since the Middle Ages. Wow. So the Queen responded to this request by donating a mated pair of swans from her royal flock. So their swans were taken from their roost along the Thames River outside of London, and on February 8th, 1957, they arrived and were met. These swans were met at the airport by the mayor, the city manager, and the president of the Chamber of Commerce. I really hope the swans appreciated it, honestly. So this entourage, I just can't imagine this, traveled by motorcade to Lake Morton, where like a whole crowd had come to see the royal swans released into Lake Morton. The swans' wings were clipped so they couldn't fly away, and after all the pomp and circumstance had subsided, the citizens just kind of watched them floating around the lake. Unfortunately, tragedy struck, and the male swan was fatally injured. The widow was taken to a Florida swanery, didn't know they had those, where she selected a commoner, that's all she had available, as her mate. And Lakeland's swan population has continued to grow into what it is today. So all of the swans currently in Lakeland can tie its existence back to Queen Elizabeth II. That, for as odd as it is kind of cool. Okay, well, I think it's only appropriate that we end our ride through Lakeland at a lake. And not only any lake, but a lake connected to the royal family. Right? Anyway, I want to thank you all for joining me on this ride today. When you're out on the road, be courteous and be kind. And most of all, be safe out there. All right, I'll see you guys next time.